Tell me about your most recent show, The Cut.
It's about, I basically 2 years ago, I got circumcised and...
Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
This week's guest is a writer, bookseller, and comedian.
The night bus is a fucking ferry to the underworld. It is a plague mobile. It's an orgy with a steering wheel. It's so many things, isn't it? It's a hospital. It's a brothel. It's a zoo. There's just all this stuff. It's a septic horse box full of raving cunts. Who are these people on the bus?
As well as being a comedian, he manages a bookshop in South London and brings his dual love of comedy and literature together every month for a book club at the Bill Murray Comedy Club. I think he's the internet's resident funny guy on books.
Hi, I'm Ben. I'm a bookseller and a comedian, which is a CV that gets less romantic as it goes along. It's like being a florist who is also a DJ, or a poet who is also a slam poet.
We had a great chat about his writing process, the awkwardness of putting yourself online, and his latest Edinburgh show that combines a pretty nerve-wracking medical procedure with something more deeply personal.
Please welcome to the stage, Ben Pope!
So Ben, you're a comedian by night, bookseller by day. How have you started to bring your two creative lives together?
Well, I started doing stand-up like 10 years ago now, like a long time ago. And then because of the nature of creative work, you gotta sometimes have a day job. And I handed my CV in at a bookshop at Review in Peckham like 6 years ago. And over time, I've sort of become a bit more bedded in there. And at a certain point, it became, I think partly because in the modern era, like in order to become successful as a comedian, it requires a lot more kind of advertising yourself than it used to. And so I sort of needed to be thinking about how I would, I guess, present myself online and elsewhere. And increasingly people were saying to me like, oh, you're the bookshop guy. And it was one of those like quite useful steers, you know, when someone like sees you and tells you how you appear. I was like, okay, maybe I should just lean into this now. Maybe I am the bookshop guy. And started trying to write little Instagram videos that were kind of either trying not to make fun of. My thing was there's a lot of sincere stuff in like the literary space, but there's not much that's that funny. I wanted to do that, but I also didn't, like, I love books. I wouldn't work at a bookshop if I didn't love like reading and writing and everything. And so I didn't really want to go in like guns blazing and be like, often the easy stance is always to just like take the piss out of something. So I've sort of been trying to make content that I think is appropriate to my sense of my point of view, passionate about the stuff, but is also funny. So there's recommendations and there's sort of me lightly roasting book cover design and that kind of thing. If I do take the piss out of stuff, it tends to be more the kind of marketing of it and the publicity engine around it rather than the actual like content of stuff. I sort of made a pretty strict rule for myself early on that I wasn't gonna do like mean reviews of people's books because I think it's incredible to get anything published. But yeah, so I sort of do that now. And then that sort of leaked into the rest of my work now. My stand-up is starting to become a bit more like book orientated, and I'm starting to try, a bit more kind of like prose that feels still kind of humorous in some way, but has a bit more kind of literary structure to it.
Because I guess with you having to advertise yourself as a comedian, the marketing for books is almost the same. Like you write this big, beautiful book and then the marketing comes in and you have to flatten it into this cover that then gets presented to the world. So I suppose all of these things, they are funny. It's worth poking fun at that. Yeah.
And I think partly because obviously there's an element of you have to sell stuff, right? And there are people who are really good at like condensing something down, and there are ideas that fit nicely. You know, I just did a reel the other day about like things that have kind of books that have no kind of obvious genre or like sit between fiction and non-fiction and that kind of thing. And like they're really hard to sell because the actual thing doesn't, you can't be like, oh, it's when Harry Met Sally meets, The Expanse or whatever. You can't like some things just don't like sit into or one like easy phrase. And so there is kind of like immediately there's this, the machinery around it doesn't necessarily serve the stuff. And so it does sort of lend itself to comedy. But it must be so hard emotionally. I mean, I can't imagine writing a book and then having to write a blurb for a book. It's like you wrote the book is the thing I wanted to say. Why would you?
If I could summarize it better, then I wouldn't have had to write the book.
Yes, exactly.
It's also weird when you have the cover design meeting, because sometimes if they show you a cover, it can really give you that moment of, oh my God, is that what you think the book is? When it's not quite what you, but then you get there and you get to suddenly have this thing that you can hold and put out into the world that you're like, yeah, this does represent what this is, and it captures people. I think so much now, like you mentioned, the machinery around everything. There is this machinery that you need to sell, and we're constantly told like you need to have even more of a niche, and for people to find you and the algorithm to help you, you need to go down the niche. I find that quite difficult with being like, I guess you're the bookshop guy. I feel like I was either the swimming girl or I was the grief girl, and then finding ways that encapsulates like everything that I want to do or say online, but also like lean into that can feel a little bit of pressure sometimes. How do you feel about having to sell yourself? Do you feel like that's like the antithesis to creativity, or are you fine to just accept that as part of the job of being a comedian?
I definitely came to doing particularly like online stuff, kicking and screaming. Like I really did not want to do it. I didn't have a smartphone until 2020. Like I just didn't.
That's cool.
I couldn't bear it. And I still struggle with it, I think. Because it just distracts from the... Well, no, it doesn't just distract. It can distract you completely from, there are days where I realize I haven't done any writing, or I haven't done any of the actual thing, or any thinking about the thing I've done. Instead, I've been worrying about having to make something that includes my face at a certain angle so that it does better on the algorithm. It's just like madness to think about that. What I will say, though, is that, like, as with all these things, in the same way that writing a novel or writing a stand-up hour or, writing a short story or something, it is like, it's a known format, right? It's like you have a thing that you're writing towards. You're like, I have a genre in mind, or I have a specific structure in mind, or I have or even just the word novel. I'm going to write a novel. It's like, okay, you have things, you're kind of parameters you're working within. It sort of becomes the same thing for selling yourself, I suppose. Like the things you have to do, you can make them creative. It actually can be quite fun to come up with like, I find myself having a kind of the same creative spark when I'm like trying to write. How am I going to make this book recommendation like actually funny or like interesting, or can I find a fun phrase for this? It is still writing, so...
I think that's good to see it as a mini creative exercise, because I think it's tough when you have people say, well, I grew up on Stuart Lee and he wouldn't have to do this. Or do you see Tessa Hadley doing an Instagram story? I'm actually not sure if Tessa Hadley is on Instagram, but things are different now, and seeing it as part of the challenge and part of a way to be creative is really important. I love the bookshop that you manage. It's really beautiful, and you have lots of cool events, which is nice. So it feels like a really big part of the community. And the other day we went to one which was comedians do poems, which was really fun to see people stretching themselves outside their like quote unquote normal creative discipline. And I hope you don't mind me saying, but I feel in my mind you're a very confident person because you're a stand-up. I can't imagine how difficult that is to stand up in front of people and make them laugh. But I feel like when you were doing poems, it was like a different side of you when you were doing your reading. Do you feel more vulnerable writing as you do performing comedy, and why do you think that feels different?
Yes, I do feel very different, and yes, you are correct to identify that I was quite nervous and weird about it. It's particularly weird in that space. I spend all my time behind that till, and then I described it when we did the first one. I described it like, because all the other comedians go behind there and they read from there as well. And then also, normally we have events set up slightly differently, but there we had everyone facing the till and looking at, when I was reading me and me reading things that I would not normally read. And I was like, it feels like someone I don't know has like just reached out and touched the small of my back. Like it was like, it was just like, why are you doing it? So it is that was nerve-wracking, just the setup. And it's a small room. And I noticed when I first started doing events at Reveal, when obviously we'd been doing them since the shop was open, but when I started like taking over, looking after them, I found it so weird introing events. Like even just being like, "Hi everyone, welcome to the shop." Like, this is whoever it is, Lauren Elkin, and going to be talking about this. And I found it so horrible because you can't get laughs. Even when you try to get laughs, people don't necessarily pick up on it. They're not there for that. So they sort of don't really kind of engage with that at all. It's a small room. So it's kind of just like, I felt so like, I've lost all my powers. It was a real like Samson has his hair cut off bit. And so it is really weird. And it was, it was quite weird at that event having to read those. And also to like a lot of people, it was a lot of people like my own age and like people I know are also writers. Like you were there and some other customers I know who are also like run the writing group up at Set Social, which is up in Peckham. And so I was like, this could be quite embarrassing, I think, for the reason that just when you move outside of your discipline, kind of always, right? And even if you're like incredibly famous and you do something outside your, like I was at Charlie XCX recently, started a Substack, and then people were like, "This is rubbish." And
so mean.
Which is so mean. And it's also like, yeah, of course, it's probably not the best thing in the world because she's like a musician and she's been working at that her whole life, probably at the expense of almost everything else. So yeah, like it's probably not going to be like, it's not going to be Tessa Hadley or whatever, And so I think I'm always a bit scared of like moving across, having this sort of, perhaps the slightly tall poppy thing of like, moving across to a discipline, the arrogance of trying to do that. And then also, there is just there's almost like a muscle memory thing when you're like, you do stand up, you have so many weapons. Like I've been doing it for a decade. Like I have all these like little tricks for if something doesn't work, you can move on to this, or like I have things I can just say about lots of different scenarios because I've been into loads of different scenarios doing it. Whereas suddenly you're there and you have to read this thing because you just said you would, and you have no idea what the response will be, except the only thing you do know is that it probably won't be the thing you normally get. And that's like, it feels like doing a magic trick or something. It's like, I don't, what noise are they going to make? I don't know, But it was fun. I was glad. And it's also very like good to push yourself and do those things, I think.
So good. I think that's how you grow, isn't it? Is by doing things outside your comfort zone, doing things that are really scary. I mean, some of Cher's best work, Moonstruck.
Sure.
That's a great sideways step.
Right. And there are loads of great examples of people who do that, right? They just like move across and they're generalists,
And I loved your short story. There was a section in it about a woman feeling like a vending machine that I've been thinking about a lot that really moved me. It's interesting that you talk about having powers and your powers being comedy. Tell me more about that. Why does that feel powerful to you?
I suppose increasingly, the older I get, I'm only 33, but, that's older than I was before. Increasingly, I sort of feel like, particularly at this age as well, when there's like quite a lot of like, you're making choices, about what you're doing with your life, or at least you're watching other people do that. It feels kind of crossroadsy. And I think I've been doing a lot of like stock taking, and part of the things I was like, okay, what actually have I got now? Like what have I worked on? What have I done? And again, we're talking about, moving into like the niche of like trying to do a bit more like book type stuff. I've been thinking a lot about like how I present myself and what it is that I am and who I am to other people. And I guess what part of that stock take has just been like, okay, what can I do? And I think one of the things I have learned to do is like, I can do stand up, and I do have like these sort of, I'm not, there are places I can't gig and there are places I can gig, and but I have a knowledge of what that is. I suppose it's like self-knowledge, really. Allowing myself to like, be like, okay, yeah, that is my skill set, or something I regard as one of my, I think maybe using the word powers is possibly a bit self-aggrandizing. But
No, it's good. No, but we all have power. We all have things that are like this thing that we can do that makes us feel really sparky and special. And when we feel like something inside us is lighting up, and doing more of that is always good. When you're on stage, do you feel like you're you, or are you a different version of you? And how is that kind of different? Sorry, I saw you rolled your eyes there. Is that a really big, serious question?
It wasn't a rolling eyes. It was like, oh my God.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I think there's a lot. The thing I can equate it to is like, you probably have, you're at a dinner party or you're like a thing, and you've got like some stories, you've got like your little stories. You got a couple, or like even just like people are like, how are you doing? Like, how is the last month? And you've got like a couple of phrases ready to go. You're like, well, this happened and this and this. And honestly, I'm just feeling like, it's like having that for your like whole physical self. It's like I've got this little like prepared way of being. And it is you, but it's also not entirely truthful, is it? Because it's like a kind of, you've said it a few times now, and it's something you're saying because you have to say something. It's like a condensed, it's the like Ribena without the water version of you. It's the, sort of, a dense concentrate. And it is weird though, the more because I don't do loads of emceeing at the moment, just because I'm trying to write some more stuff. But there was a while there where I was doing loads and loads of hosting gigs and just like chatting with the audience and that kind of stuff. And the more you do that, the more comfortable you get on stage, which is great. But also the more the sort of boundary between you and the act just sort of becomes more of a kind of osmotic sort of valve. It just sort of like becomes very, very thin. There's things that you want to talk about. And so that are just happening genuinely, and you start, and it's really good practice to do, because it makes you talk about almost anything and try to frame it in a funny way. It's just like very useful for writing. But it does also sort of start to like, it makes you kind of permeable in a, maybe if you do it for too long, that you're not really sure who you are anymore. And I definitely know a lot of, it depends, also just depends how you're built, I think. There are lots of comedians I know who are very on all the time, and very just like funny in the green room, funny on stage, and it's a very similar kind of funny. And that's just who they are. And I think I used to be quite judgmental of that and think, oh my God, would you just like tone it goddamn down? Like, why do we have to do this all the time? Actually, just the more you go, you're like, they're just built like that. And that's actually just like, they are punchline funny all the time. Whereas I'm way more like, having a chat like we are now, like normal chat. And then I've worked hard on this little 20 minutes that I can just like, everyone just does it slightly differently. The version of me that I present is definitely on stage is camper and is probably a little bit more high status. It's like simultaneously more high status and less. Like I can be a real little bitch on stage sometimes, and then equally the humiliations the things I talk about are like often are how something that's happened that's gone wrong for me, or like that is, and it's sort of quite pathetic or whatever. And actually the truth is way more in the middle. It's like, I don't think that much of myself, but I'm also like fine. Like I'm not, when humiliating things happen, it's like, okay, whatever. It's not, I'm not like, oh. So it's a kind of, an expanded spectrum of stuff.
You definitely have to kind of pull all parts of your personality in all directions to be able to be on stage or even write a story or just craft anything. Tell me about your most recent show, The Cut, which is a great title, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, I thought about it a long time. It was almost going to be called, well, I'll tell people what it's about first, and then that maybe will make more sense of it. It's about, I basically 2 years ago, I got circumcised, and
congratulations.
Thank you so much. there's less of me now, but in some ways there's more of me. It was about that, and then it sort of latterly is sort of about my dad, who passed away the same year, and it was sort of it sort of tells the story of me going from like ignoring this problem that I have to dealing with it. Yeah, and there's a lot about like men looking after their health in it as well, and it's sort of like a narrative stand-up show, so there's a kind of a bit of a through line. And we were going to call it, I was going to call it A Private Function, which is like the name of a film with Michael Palin in it about a couple who smuggle, they sell like pigs on the black market. And I thought it was like a good pun on like privates, but it was also, there is a story in the cut that is about my dad and my mum smuggling a pig out of a school. But I quickly realized that
so casually.
yeah. I don't know if you ever have this when you're writing, where like you want to write about something that genuinely happened, but because the sort of, it's like a family story, or it like exists, talking about yourself, talking about like your family stuff and stuff that you find funny as a family, or like interesting as a like, that's like your own kind of lore. Sometimes it's really hard to make it like relatable to other people, because the reason it's important to you is because it's like been in your life for a very long time. And like that story was like really hard to make people, I had to like work really hard to make it like fun and like onboarding an audience onto it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but that story is so specific and so crazy, and everyone should go see the show to be able to hear it in all its like delightfulness. But I also think sometimes in being more specific, you actually become more universal. I think it feels like things are unrelatable to other people, but actually there's something about the craziness or the randomness of families in those situations that do become more relatable. I love that story. It was very charming. It also is a perfect way that encapsulates you and your family and the particulars of that. It shows the dynamics of your family really beautifully.
Thanks, Belle. Yeah. It was a confusing show to write, but I think we got there. Yeah, and I think I'm going to make it available online at some point. We just filmed it the other day, so it'll be around in the universe. Not to promote my stuff on your podcast, sorry.
No, please do. I want more people to see it. We actually took a few friends that I thought would find you funny, and had some good chats after. Because after he was like, "Yeah, it's kind of weird you chose that. I didn't. Yeah, was that because I got circumcised?" And I was like, "Oh, I didn't know that." So I think he found that quite relevant as well. So we ended up having some good chats after.
That's
which is
great.
Really always the aim of good comedy is that you leave having good chats. But we had so much to chat about because, of course, it made us laugh and it was very funny. But there were parts of it that really moved me, and my heart was breaking for you. And I think people, when you're in that space, you're able to feel for parts of yourself that have grieved or lost or have complicated feelings about parents. When you're writing, are you always trying to intentionally kind of hold both of those things, or do you feel like that comes quite naturally? Because I suppose comedy, or maybe there is an intention for it always to have both sad and happy and funny.
I definitely, when I write these like longer shows that have like a narrative, I'm always very keen to try and include some other element. So it's not just that it's funny, it's not just like gags all the way through, or not even just like the stories are already funny all the way through. It's like, it's interesting, or there's like there's an idea, or I have a theory, or I have like a kind of we go on a little bit of a kind of emotional sort of trip. I wrote one a couple of years ago about like weddings. I used to be like a wedding waiter, and when I was a teenager, and I used to sing at weddings all the time, and then you hit a certain age, you're like at one every weekend, every fucking summer for like 5 years. And so it was like a story about like 3 weddings, and really what it ended up being about was the fact that like I got like cheated on and dumped like 5 or 6, maybe 7 or 8 years ago now. It actually became about my point of view of just being like, I never want to get married again. And then just sort of slowly not get married again. I never got married, but I hate the idea of like, of committing to something for that long. It's so ridiculous. And then actually like the journey of the show was like softening to that and being like, everyone does it differently, and just that kind of thing where I'm just like, in those sort of shows, I sort of feel like I have a duty to not just offer, I don't know, hybrid stuff is so much more interesting to me, I think, than just, I love watching someone smash 20 minutes of stand-up just with funny stuff. That's so great. And it's often like, it's a transcendent thing to see that. But I think over an hour, like you're kind of like, that's a long time. And it's hard to be just like, ha 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 the whole time. So I feel like it's a nice thing to offer up. Also, it's just like what my brain is drawn to. There's so many offcuts I have when I write for stand-up. There's so many like things that I like work on idea, and you'll suddenly have all these phrases and all these thoughts and all this other stuff that just doesn't quite fit into a joke. It just doesn't land, doesn't have like you have to be so ruthless with editing so that you can keep momentum. And so suddenly you have all this stuff and you're like, God, there's some interesting things here that I want to share. And actually, if you can find a space for them in a show. And that was definitely the case with the cut where I was like, I'd never really been able to talk about my dad on stage because it's so hard at like a club gig to be like, by the way, my dad has Parkinson's. Like you can't really sort of, it's really difficult to do. So I had all of these thoughts and feelings that I had been writing down for like a long time that were like intense thoughts and very like, I was caring for my dad for a very long time. I think my mum did the most of it, but I was there most weekends for several years, and it was just like, it's a lot, and I wouldn't really creatively couldn't go anywhere, it's just in the notebook. So I was really keen to talk about that after he died, because I was like, now I sort of feel like I have a reason to, because it's now there's an element of it which is, I know this sounds awful, but it's about me now. in that like I'm going through an experience here, and actually I need a coping mechanism, and I really want to deal with this, and it's actually quite important for me to deal with this now. So I sort of started digging into it, and I found that, you were saying about like sort of the idea that like sad and funny might sit alongside each other. I actually found it was really useful for the show because it was sort of what the show was about. Like the tone and the subject were the same thing, in that the show was really about how so much of the really difficult stuff of caring for someone, of someone dying, of like serious things like sex and surgery and medical stuff. So it's all really difficult, and it's also so funny and there's so much like ridiculous stuff within it, and that kind of like weird cliff edge, but the stuff is very, very serious and then kind of dies off at the edge of a cliff. It's like, that's how you deal with any of this stuff, or certainly how I deal with any of this stuff. It all kind of came together. Suddenly I was able to talk about all the stuff I wanted to talk about. I was able to talk about like, my penis and my dad, and how weird it is when you visit your parents and you watch TV and it has loads of sex in it, and going to surgery and having all these like really humiliating experiences in the doctor's surgery, but then also like the weird loneliness of looking after someone and them not being able to speak, and having to like the reversal of roles of like caring for your own father, like, and how that changes your relationship completely. And I don't know, just for whatever reason, it managed to, those things all seem to coincide. And the great thing about it being about a circumcision was also that it prepped people. People were like, okay, this is going to be silly, but it's also going to be like, if you're not up for hearing about that, you're not going to come to the show. And then that means I'm not going to sort of jump scare you with a grief story. If you're not up for hearing about someone having a bit of their penis cut off, it's unlikely that you're going to want to hear about, a family member dying. So I was like, there's actually like, every bit of it just seemed to sort of like nicely tie together. It's slightly, and I don't know how you feel about this when you finish the title year. I don't know how you feel about like when you write something and you're like, this has really come together and it's been very personal and I'm a bit worried I'll never write anything like this again, you know, because it's so important to you, but also like for whatever reason the things sort of, the planets align a bit and it's a bit scary then going, okay, I guess I'll pick up the pen again and start doing some more stuff.
Hello, it's me, Freya, just letting you know that you can now buy my debut novel, A Real Piece of Work. It's a book about sisters, complicated families, and what happens to grief when it becomes a collective experience. You can now buy A Real Piece of Work wherever you buy your books, and if you go in store to Foyles, you'll receive a limited edition cotton bandana while stocks last. If you prefer to listen to your books, then you can get it as an audiobook. Happy reading. It's really nice to hear you talk about that because it's such a special place to be when you're processing something. And I guess I'm thinking, hearing you say that the space between what's funny and what's sad is often where there's like heart in the middle. And that's why the storytelling feels so good, is because that's what that is. And it has these two functions. For you, you're being able to process something, and by being able to go through all of the wreckage of what you've been through, because like, where do you put away something like that? There were so many experiences from being in the hospital with my brother that just made it feel like, I'm sure you had this carrying with your dad. How do I continue my normal life and like go into the office and be with my friends? Like, where do I put that? And unless I had somewhere to put it in context of everything else, like the funny moments or sad moments, felt really difficult to find a way to move forward. But then you also have this extension of once you've made the thing and you've put it out, it gives other people permission to find something funny or to put it away, or to be like, this is what life is. And for you to give people permission to be like, I've been caring and there were moments that are funny. Because I think a lot of people do struggle to feel that they're allowed to find things that are funny. Do you have people come up and spoken to you in the audience and connected with that?
I mean, it's by far the most like engagement I've had in the real world from anything I've ever done. All types of things, you know. I've had men with their sons come up and be like, we're both circumcised, which is that's lovely, obviously, and
I'm
very
imagining
fun.
arms around each other, like
like truly, just like like you couldn't write it. It was so funny. And then also, loads of people who were just like, I was crying. It reminded me of this. It was so helpful for me for this. And I think you're right. Like, I never want to be too kind of, I don't know. It's easy to be like, yeah, what a gift to give people. I didn't feel like that when I was making it. I wasn't like, oh God, people are gonna really cry at this.
Love this.
You know, yeah. I did never think that.
I'm gonna really help.
Yeah. Can you imagine? But I do think, having done it, that I was like, yeah, that's really nice that had that reaction. And, you know, to pay the compliment forward, I had that with your book. I read your book in the midst of like dealing with my folks, and I think I probably could find somewhere an Instagram message I sent you being like, by the way, it's like really cool, like seeing like, you know, people my own age going through stuff and like dealing with it in this way and like being able to like express this, and it was a gift to be like, oh, okay, cool. Okay, this sounds really bad, but I was like, okay, it's not just me that is like having a hard time. You know, which I know I'm sorry to express it like that, because obviously I wouldn't wish it on anyone, obviously. But it was very like, it was a valve.
Yeah, you don't intend to do that. You don't intend to, well, I guess I'll really connect with people. It's more self-expression that then has this unexpected gift of connecting with people. And one of the things that I thought, you know, being so in that moment where life just feels so impossible, and creating something in that place, I especially feel like a lot for me, writing was also about like finding a way to be happy, or like, what does it mean to now? I'm sure you feel the same as us being young, going through something like, okay, well, I've still got my life to, thankfully, I've still got my life to live. What does that mean? How do I find joy and go forward? When I first started doing events, I would feel like a bit of a sham, because people would say to me, how are you not crying? Like, how are you talking about this and not crying? I can't, you know, say anything without crying about the person I'm missing. I used to feel so bad, feel quite defensive about that. But I think in some ways, like writing about it, talking about it has helped me. I wouldn't say it's like an armor, but it's taken off a little bit of the bruise that I'm able to open that up. And also I think partly because when you're doing an event, often you're making a book talk, you're often making space for other people's grief. It feels more about that space in between me and other people than it does just about me. Do you feel like you have that when you're on stage, that people are like, how are you not crying? Has it made it easier? Or do you feel that because you're doing comedy, there's this like natural protective bubble around you?
Yeah, I think it's partly that. And I have to say, you are very brave to like do that at a book event and open that up to it. Like, that's way more of a giving people carte blanche to essentially open their hearts up to you. Like, if we know anything about book events, it's that the audience loves to be involved and make it about them. So which is totally great, but I do, yeah, that's a much harder thing to do, I think. Whereas with comedy, there is a kind of, there's this sort of, it's a performance, so there is a bit more of a fourth wall there. I don't think I ever had this from anyone else, but I did internally worry that being able to perform it and to kind of make a version of it that was like available for other people and to do it live, I did think that maybe that spoke to some sort of slightly coldness on my part, or like a kind of psychopathy or something. I worried about that, how am I doing this?
But we're all trying to get by. As soon as you're selling tickets or doing anything, that feels kind of gross and nasty, doesn't it? But
oh my God, yeah. The mercenariness of that. I was so, when I was writing, I was like, we have to avoid this feeling contrived in any way, because if this feels weird and fake, then people will be like, ugh, gross, you've like sold out.
You cutting an onion backstage trying to make yourself cry.
Yeah. Yeah. Just chilies, just yeah, 100% that. And I really, really worried about that. Was worried about my family's like what they would think. But I think the thing that a few months into starting writing it and starting doing work in progresses and stuff, I knew in my body how it felt, and it felt so much better and so much more like I gave myself a lot of like, chatted to myself a lot about it and was like, this is how I process stuff. Like, this is just, it's how I've always done it. I got mugged. I wrote a routine about getting mugged. I got broken up with. I wrote a routine about that. When stuff happens, this is how I've always done it. It would be a huge omission to like not write about this. It would be so wrong. And it would be such a lie to myself to not do it. And immediately on doing it, I was like, this feels good. Like you were saying, like when something awful's happened and then going forward, I was like making something new out of this. And that felt really like great. That felt like a good thing to do. I logged that feeling and was like, we're going to use that when I'm feeling anxious about this.
Yeah.
And remind myself.
And let's not think about, what's going to happen when really good things in your life happen. You're going to have no material.
Yeah.
Tell me about going to Edinburgh. So you're taking the cut to Edinburgh this year. You're going and you're just going for a week. What is it like to perform at Edinburgh? I love reading rom-coms and novels set at Fringe Festival because I just find it such a romantic idea. People going to the city and running around doing shows and the party's amazing. Or is it actually just a kind of pit of anxious people trying to get everyone to go to their shows? What's it like?
It changes over time, and it has definitely changed the older I've got. I went for the first time when I was a student, and it was like so magic to me. It did a real number on me. It really, I went up when I was, I think, 21 or 20, the first time I went up. I did 3 shows every day. I did a kid show in the morning, I did a sketch show in the afternoon, and I did a stand-up like mixed bill thing at like 6 p.m. And it was exhausting. And I met loads of people and I went to see loads of stuff. And it was just like, you feel like you're part of the show and also you are getting to see the show. It's like such a cool, exciting, because it's so big, there's just like constantly something on. There's always like, It feels like, you're at the 24-hour buffet. Then I think the older I have gotten, the more it has become work, and I'm there, in order for work reasons now, as well as for fun. It does change a bit, and I think particularly with the increased pressures of the financial stuff, and it's just been under a lot of scrutiny about how it's going to continue to exist and also be an open access festival and all this sort of stuff. So it's become more of an anxiety inducing thing. And I think if you're definitely if you are an act up there and you're at a paid venue, you are making the most of every day to make sure you're not making a horrific loss. It's it can happen. And so it can happen a lot. It happens to most people all the time. So you have to really to think about it quite a kind of careful way. For a few years there, I just didn't go because after the pandemic, I was I was exhausted. I'd been 7 years in a row. I didn't really, the pandemic was such a bottleneck afterwards. Everyone was coming back at the same time. I kind of felt like the whole thing felt just really, like we were talking about earlier, mercenary. Everything seemed to be geared towards you'll sell out a show if you months in advance. And so, but then no one else will be getting as many audience members. It just seemed really weird. And then I went back last year with the Cut Show, and it was it had slightly mellowed, I think. And also I was there with something I was really sure about, and I had a nice little team of folks I was working with, and it was a lovely time. It is really magical. It's also a magical city. Edinburgh, in or out of the festival, is just, you can't help but fall in love with it. There's so much gradient, There are so many views all the time. Views are very important.
Days.
Yeah.
Me and Jem have been the last 2 years, and going and running around the city, going to see shows has just been fantastic because you're just taking on so many ideas and inspiration. The chats you have as you're running from one place to another for falling in love and being in love. I think it's the best holiday that you can, also the most expensive holiday you can have. And I wanted to ask you about the finances of it, because every year we kind of look of how do people make this work? You must have to have a job that allows you to be away, and the finances, but I can never find much online. And I know both you and I have spoken before about having a passion and having something that's basically a full-time job. People at events will often be like, oh, so you write full-time? No. I have a job, I got to pay the rent somehow. But how financially does going to the Fringe work as a comedian?
It really depends on how you want to do it. There's a couple of different systems. If you're at a paid ticketed venue, then you are kind of almost immediately on the bit of the back foot. You're paying venue hire, you're paying a lot of money for their marketing, they'll have a lot of inbuilt fees and stuff. It means you're potentially going to get more audience because it's a bit more a fish, but it does also just mean you are immediately taking a thing. On top of that, then you can, the most professional people come with production companies, and they come with PRs and stuff, and that is thousands of pounds extra on top of that. And sure, it means you're looked after incredibly well. It means you've got street teams of people flying for you. It means you've got someone getting the papers to come and see you and all this stuff. But again, that's thousands of pounds that is eating out of your settlement. Then you've got to be in a big enough space that is charging enough on tickets and you're selling enough every day that you might make that back, and let's say a little bit extra so that you have some profit to come home with. That's pretty rare if you're doing all of that stuff to be making a packet. However, there is also the free festival, which is loads of free venues. You have to pay, I think there's depending on which one, there's a couple of different free festival systems. There might be a little you pay 100 quid or something, and that covers everything. You go in their pamphlet, you go in all the stuff. Then you get a venue for free. You don't know what it's going to be like. It could be a nice pub function room that's done up nicely with a mic and stuff. It could be in the arse end of nowhere and the toilet is overflowing and it's a horror show. So that's a real gamble. But the more you go, and acts who do it lots of years in a row, they get better venues because they're sort of the loyalty scheme they have going with that. Because you're getting cash in a bucket at the end of the show. You can make some money there. I know a lot of comedians, and that tends to be perhaps more because the shows that work better in there are circuit comedians or people who like running mixed bills or like just they have a bit more they've got a malleable act that can just like fit a space and just, you know, get numbers on bums on seats. Everyone has a nice time. The more theatre-y shows, if you need lighting, you have to go somewhere with lighting, you know, so it's like it's a whole different thing. So there are ways to make money and it is possible. More the problem is the fact that there is nowhere to stay. All the places are thousands of pounds to rent. You need to know someone who lives in Edinburgh, ideally, probably is the way to do it. That's a huge bar to access. So there's just like a big thing recently. It's just been like working class comedians really struggled to like, you know, as anyone from a background where there's like there's no like immediate cushion, it's so much harder. Edinburgh Fringe is like the cattle market. It's like for comedy in this country, it's the trade show. And if you can't afford to go to the trade show, then there's a lot of opportunities you're missing out on. So it's tough. I was very lucky last year. Like I had a friend who had a place in Edinburgh. So I was like, that immediately made everything way more easy, you know. And I have a day job, so I can earn money to go, you know. But I did have to take all my holiday at once, which is like not ideal.
But then, so ideally, the show does well. You get some reviews. Talk to me about that, because I'm always interested, like the different kind of rating culture that different art types have. Because one thing with books that's funny is you have this blurb culture where you have to ask other authors to give you a few inspiring words. Then with comedy, ideally you get a review and you get a star rating. How generally do you handle people's perception of your work? Do you read reviews? Do you care? Are you good or are you quite sensitive?
I think it's a real mixed bag. Getting reviewed is in some ways a luxury. So I'm always like, oh, someone's come and seen it and they've bothered to have an opinion about it. That's nice. It's hard at the Fringe, I think, particularly because they're seeing so many shows. You really have to stand out in a very specific way. So often, I think sometimes the reviews you would get the rest of the year are quite different to the reviews you would get at the Fringe, where you've kind of got these sort of sun-dried tomato reviewers who are just like absolutely blasted with art. And they're just like, and you know, they're only going to be impressed by the most specific or outrageous thing.
Do you have any advice for handling people's perception of your work?
Something someone told me, which I think was really useful. I had a director a few years ago called Rohan Acharna, who's fab. And he told me, like, it's really good to look at them because irrespective of whether you agree with it, and like, you got to get a bit of a hide to this, and, you know, sometimes you just got to look at it. There might well be something in there. These are professional critics often. There might be something in there that's really useful for you. It's not the same, but it is a little bit like, you know, your teacher handing your homework in and they've made a little comment on the side. It's like, that could be helpful for you, or at least tell you maybe something about how you're coming across. I think something a lot of like new comedians often struggle with to begin with, once they like work themselves in a bit more, is not quite sure how people feel, like see them. And so sometimes they will like, they'll be saying something or suggesting something is relatable, and the implicit in what they're saying is, I think this is relatable. And it just isn't, because it's very specific to them. And actually having someone go, this was quite affronting, or this was like very like, this was too much, or this was not enough, this was like incredibly difficult to pass, I didn't really understand this. Like having someone say that to you can be really constructive as criticism. So I think it is good to look at them. I don't like doing it. It gets my heart rate up. And when I don't get a nice one, I'm sad. But
every day's a school day.
It is weird that we get stars and you guys get blurbs. Very occasionally you do see comedians who have on their posters, they have like a quote from like a famous comedian. They'll be like, oh, this is great.
I've seen that a few times.
And I see that and I always just think, well, they've always just asked them in a green room. Like it's not.
I saw it.
Yeah.
My partner, like, what would you say if you were going to give a quote for my book? And he always jokes, it's got pages.
That's great.
I'm always interested, like when I was writing the title year, I had to kind of plan the end of the book because it was nonfiction before I'd almost lived it. And so I'm always interested for people, if you were writing a story of your life right now and you had to think what you wanted the happy ending to be for you as a character in 12 months' time, where would you end your story? What kind of narrative arc do you think Ben in the book would need to go on?
Eek. I think that's such a hard question, Freya.
You don't have to answer
This
if you
is
don't
such
want.
a therapeutic question. At the moment, I'm going through a phase of saying yes to too many things and working a lot, and it's making me, and drinking too much coffee, and it's making me feel crazy. So maybe the journey I need to go on is towards some kind of more balance and peace would be nice.
So there's going to be a nice peaceful vignette at the end of the book.
Yes,
that's nice.
I think so. I've just been reading. I assume you must have read this. I assume Swimming Studies by Leanne Shapton. Yeah, but I've just been reading that, and just all the descriptions of just like all these lovely pools. I've seen different hotels and stuff. And there's part of me that is just like, I think I just want a holiday. Is what I'm describing here.
You need a break, and you're going to Edinburgh instead. But you're going to find some moments of peace, and you're going to find some of those views.
Yes, some views and some peace would be really nice.
Thank you, Ben.